Hey everyone, my name is Kaylee Hill. I am an RBT of 2 years. My field experience is currently at an in-home ABA company that uses play-based learning to teach clients ages 2 through 12 and the familiarity of their own home. I plan to practice in-home directly after BCBA status, but my long-term goal is to work in a school. I have experience conducting direct assessments such as the VB MAP and ABLES under the direct supervision of my BCBA. I also have some experience with indirect assessment, such as parent interviews and the intake process. So what are behavioral assessments? Behavioral assessments allow professionals to develop hypotheses about behavioral function, and then they use that function to design treatments that can alter the environmental antecedents or consequences to produce a positive behavioral change. So I found 3 supporting references. The first one is Netzel and Bogan, 2008. It states that teachers and practitioners often conduct behavioral assessments, such as functional behavioral assessments or FBAs, as a first step in trying to understand why the learner may be engaging in these interfering behaviors. These assessments help determine the function of the behavior and how to target these challenge behaviors with intervention. So the goal as BCBAs is to determine the function of that behavior and to create interventions to alter or decrease that challenging behavior. We can alter that behavior through functional communication training, differential reinforcement, response interruption or redirection, extinction, and stimulus control or environmental modification. This article also discusses the 7 recommended steps to implement an FBA for children on the autism spectrum or with challenging behaviors. The first step is to establish a team. It is so important that teachers, parents, other professionals, BCBAs, and therapists are all on the same page with that client's treatment plan. The second step is to identify that challenge behavior. Collect the ABC data, determine the function, collect parent and teacher interviews, and other methods to identify that function. Third step is to collect baseline data. Collect information from multiple sources by using tools such as the functional assessment screening tool and problem behavior questionnaire. The fourth step is to develop a hypothesis statement. That should include the setting of events, immediate antecedents, and consequences that surround that interfering behavior, restatement and refinement of the description of the interfering behavior that is occurring, and the function that that behavior serves. The fifth step is testing that hypothesis. Modify your environment and the antecedent to increase the probability of that behavior occurring. You might think, why would you want to increase that challenging behavior? As BCBAs, sometimes we must increase, change our antecedents and increase that probability of behavior in order to observe it, in order to determine the function. So we can create an intervention plan, which is step 6, develop interventions. Create an intervention plan to alter the challenge behavior. An example of intervention plans would be differential reinforcement. Step 7 would be to modify the effectiveness of that intervention. We would modify the effectiveness and intervention that outlines when, where, by whom, and how the data is collected. Another supporting reference was by Hanley, 2012, and it discusses the importance of functional assessments and when they should be implemented. This article stresses that these assessments are not a simple behavior measuring tool, but that it is a process by which the variables influence problem behavior are identified. It recommends going through the functional assessment process because it allows you to identify an effective treatment for severe problem behavior. This article also touches on functional analysis, or FA, and that there is a direct observation of behavior and the manipulation of some environmental event during an FA. There are some obstacles of these assessments, such as hard sell to parents and teachers, as they may be unfamiliar with these assessments, and that they may be too risky for the client or the implementer, as FAs provoke behaviors in order for them to be observed. And the final supporting reference, it addresses a study of 102 participants conducted to determine the best treatment option for self-injurious behaviors, or SIBs. Its findings were that 26.3% of the participants engaged in higher rates of SIB with the positive reinforcement condition. For this condition group, interventions based upon non-contingent attention, extinction, differential reinforcement of other behaviors, or DRO, and timeout proved most effective, whereas verbal reprimands and response interruption were least effective. It also found that 38% of the participants engaged in higher rates of SIB within the negative reinforcement condition. For this group, interventions based upon removal of aversive stimuli, reduction of task frequency, extinction from escape, and DRO were most effective, whereas escape from social attention and timeout were least effective. 25% of these participants engaged in higher rates of SIB within the automatic reinforcement condition. In these cases, interventions based upon non-contingent access to reinforcement, sensory extinction, DRO, and response interruption were more effective than contingent attention, extinction, and timeout. Based on the results of this study, it determined that the big four, communication, gaining attention, engaging in play or leisure activities, and coping skills, is a preventative approach to problem behavior during the behavior assessment process. When do we conduct a functional assessment? Current practice guidelines suggest that the assessment and treatment of challenging behaviors should consist of conducting a functional behavior assessment following the onset of problem behavior. This assessment process can include indirect and direct assessment, as well as manipulation of variables to determine the function of behavior. Professionals such as BCBA should conduct a functional assessment when the client exhibits one or more behaviors that may cause harm or disruption to themselves or others within the environment to determine the function of challenge or disruptive behaviors. Once the function is determined, then intervention plans can be created and implemented. What defines a challenge behavior? Challenging behavior is defined as any repeated pattern of behavior that interferes with or is at risk of interfering with the child's optimal learning or engagement in pro-social interactions with peers and adults. Although there are some behaviors that most or all people can agree are challenging, such as self-injury, physical aggression, kicking, biting, scratching, there are also other challenging behaviors that can be defined by its effect or possible effect on learning and engagement. Yelling, elopement, other behaviors that can be disruptive, but not necessarily physically harmful. FBA versus FA. In FBA, tests behavior directly and indirectly. It reviews existing data. It uses indirect and direct assessments, parent interviews, ABC data. FBAs happen in the environment of the child and help them thrive in that environment later on. An FA is testing how certain changes impact the occurrence of problem behavior. It tests one function of behavior at a time. For instance, it'll first test escape, then attention, then tangible, finally sensory or automatic. It only uses direct tests of behavior. It manipulates the environment and isolates the child in order to observe behavior. Both of these assessments are behavioral assessments. They both gather information about behavior. They help us determine what causes the behavior in the first place and what maintains that behavior. My organization is called Kangaroo Journeys. It is a play-based company, and it uses both FBA and FA to determine the function of behavior and create behavioral intervention plans for our clients. Though my organization favors FBA, an FA should be conducted when the child does not engage in said challenge behavior in their natural environment, and when the environment must be manipulated in order to observe occurrence of said behavior. At my organization, it typically takes 60 to 90 minutes to conduct an FBA, but this is also client dependent. We typically use these steps to conduct the FBA process. 1, we determine the problem behavior we are observing or targeting and create an operational definition. 2, we conduct parent or caregiver interviews and other indirect methods to obtain client information. 3, we collect data on behavior using continuous measurements such as frequency or duration. 4, we design a function-based intervention plan that all client team members are on board with and able to implement effectively and consistently. Finally, we use precision teaching and standard celebration charts to evaluate the effectiveness of intervention across client sessions over time. In conclusion, my experience with FBAs through my organization aligned really well with what I've learned through my coursework. In previous courses, I completed a mock FBA with conducting parent interviews, collecting baseline data, and creating a function-based intervention plan. There have also been relevant podcast articles regarding FBAs throughout this course. FAs seem to be discussed less in courses, as well as the textbook. Assuming the fact that FAs require more altering of the environment, my company does not typically use this assessment, as it is a naturalistic, play-based teaching company. We like to use FBAs because it considers the child's natural environment without too much manipulation to observe those behaviors. Some questions that I have for my classmates would be, why are FAs not discussed as much as FBAs? Do you prefer conducting FBAs or FAs? What checklist does your company follow when conducting FBAs? And are there any interesting or unheard of behaviors that you or your BCBA have targeted during the conduction of FBA or FA? This concludes my video on behavioral assessments. I hope that this was informative, and thank you for watching. Bye.